Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about victims' compensation. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Nicole Valentin. Nicole uses she, her pronouns and is the Victim Compensation Coordinator/Specialist at the VSC. Nicole received her bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Berkeley College in New Jersey, and after relocating to Florida, she continued her work with victims in her role at the state attorney's office in Seminole County, working with survivors daily to advocate for them to fulfill needs such as medical, housing, counseling, and compensation. Nicole realized this was a true passion of hers, and in her new role at the VSC, hopes to continue her advocacy by empowering survivors and increasing their understanding of their rights and resources available to them. So Nicole, thank you so much for being here today.
Good morning, Emilie, and all our listeners. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And I also have Priscilla Aquino. Priscilla uses she, her pronouns and is a bilingual victim advocate and crisis counselor at the VSC who is fluent in Spanish. She obtained her master's in social work from Keene University in New Jersey and has over 20 years of experience working with adolescents, families, and victims of crime. Priscilla is very passionate about helping people heal from their trauma and rediscover their inner strength, as well as educating others. She hopes to be the voice for those who are unable to advocate for themselves. So Priscilla, thank you as well for being here on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Emilie. Hello, everyone.
So as a really brief introduction, as the Certified Rape Crisis Center for Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County, one of the many free services the VSC offers to survivors is aiding in applying for victims' compensation. So later we will be providing a lengthier definition of it, but essentially victims' compensation is a program that provides monetary resources to survivors to help them after a crime. So today we have two amazing people from the VSC team to chat about their roles in helping survivors, what victims' compensation is, why it is important for survivors, success stories, ways the program can improve and how it has changed, and how the VSC can help survivors beyond victims' compensation. We also realize that this is kind of a lengthy topic. So this may become, once again, like a two-parter episode or not. We're kind of seeing how this conversation will go, but just keep that in mind as well. But with that, Nicole and Priscilla, I'd love to hear a little bit about your roles at the VSC.
So, hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. So my role here as the victims compensation coordinator/specialist, whichever is easier for anyone to say, is be that frontline person for survivors when it comes down to applying for any compensation benefits. So the one thing that I do with survivors, but also other agencies, is educate them on the program, understanding what this program consists of, understanding the qualifications and who may or may not be eligible and what the process is on the VSC side of it. Ideally, once that portion is done, I can initially just meet with a survivor and kind of get the ball rolling with their application and getting them the assistance that they need. I guess just think of it as that middleman between VSC and the Attorney General's office. I make sure that the application process goes through smoothly, making sure that there is constant communication between the organizations, and just to ensure that the survivor knows what's going on with their assistance.
Yeah, and I think we'll be talking a lot about kind of the complicated process there, but I think that that's really, really key to helping survivors is keeping them informed of like, this is what's going on. So I appreciate that. Priscilla, can you talk a little bit about your role at the VSC?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Priscilla. So I am a bilingual advocate / crisis counselor. And basically what I do is I work with victims of sexual assault or domestic violence or any type of crime that would come into the Victim Service Center looking for services. My main role, though, is to assist victims that may need assistance with obtaining a forensic examination. Once they've been assaulted, I would meet the victim in one of the centers that we have located in Orange County and Osceola County. And I'm just here to just provide support, right? Support and just to let them know what the process is and what they can expect. In addition to that, we provide crisis intervention, crisis counseling at the time that they're getting the exam, but also within the office, because not everybody goes in for an exam. So if the person, maybe has had a history of trauma, maybe something that happened in their childhood, and now they want to speak to somebody, maybe, get some counseling services or therapeutic services, I would sit with them, do an intake, and then assist them in determining like what their needs are. And that may also be, offering case management services and resources as well. With our topic today, one of the things as an advocate is also letting our victims know of this application that they can apply and linking them with Nicole so that they can meet up with her, schedule an appointment and get, the ball rolling on their application and seeing, what their needs are and seeing what they may need assistance with.
Thank you so much. And it's, I know that our advocates really work like together. They're really a team. So I can clearly see kind of how you and Nicole work really closely together. And I know that Priscilla, you have worked with victims' compensation in the past. So can you talk a little bit about those previous roles before you were at the VSC?
Sure. So fun fact, I am a new Floridian, just moved here about a month ago. I come from New Jersey, and that's where the bulk of my experience has been. So prior to coming here, I was in a role of a case manager for victims of crime program that was offered at a local hospital in Central Jersey. And basically, I worked with all types of victims of any type of crime, and we would provide case management services. And one of the tasks that I also had to do was assist them with filling out the victims' compensation application, but for New Jersey. So I do have experience, in filling out the application requirements and just navigating that system and helping, clients, try to get some financial assistance for the crimes and injuries that they've suffered.
Awesome. And I know that we'll talk a little bit about how victims' compensation, the program may differ a little bit between Florida and other states like New Jersey. And Nicole, I didn't write this question down, but in your bio, you talk about, your role at the state's attorney's office. Were you helping with like victims' compensation or were you helping victims in a different way?
So while I was at the state attorney's office, I was in the misdemeanor department. So when the cases initially come in, like domestic violence cases or sexual assault cases, kind of when they're in that beginning stage of getting filed on, I was an assistant to the state attorney. My role there pretty much was to help the parties of the case navigate through the court system, but also being in contact with their attorney on the case. Victims' comp came into play more so in conversation, like when a survivor would ask, what resources are there? What can I do? I'm trying to get away from the perpetrator. I don't know where to go. I heard about victims' comp very briefly during a training. So I just kind of piggybacked off of that and just kept it in conversation throughout my time there. I didn't really put it into full effect as far as my work with victims' comp until I was working at the domestic violence shelter after the state attorney's office.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like you both have a lot of experience with victims' compensation, which is great because this is what this podcast is about. But essentially, I'd love to now, I like to start off with kind of definitions. So how would you define victims' compensation? What is it? And then we'll talk a little bit about like the different facets of it as well.
Yeah, so it's in the title alone. It's a compensation available for victims. And I like to call them survivors because if they are still working with us, they are a survivor. But it is a compensation program that is available through the state of Florida for survivors of a crime such as a sexual battery, human trafficking, domestic violence, or any major violent crimes such as armed robbery. If it's a family member applying on behalf of a victim, then it would be maybe in the case of like a homicide, manslaughter type of setting. I've worked with survivors who are victims of home invasion. So it's any survivor of any violent crime.
I think I also would like to say, in addition to that, it's just an opportunity for survivors just to get a second chance, right? Depending on their crime and what their injuries are, a lot of times they kind of realize, I don't have, any options, or how am I going to pay for this bill, or how am I going to relocate? This gives them an opportunity to kind of think about, starting over, or like what the next steps are. It kind of gives a little bit of sense of hope, in terms of helping them, with the trauma that they, just experienced.
Absolutely. I love that. And, you talked a little bit about how someone could be applying for some on the behalf of someone else. So you said it was available to victims of crime. So who is that exactly, as far as like, so it can be someone who has gone through a crime, but also someone can apply on behalf of someone as well?
Yeah. So there's two different ways when it comes down to the application process. So the one scenario that we see the most is when the survivor themselves are applying for the assistance, where, for example, let's say it's a domestic violence situation and they are trying to relocate. So the survivor would reach out to the certified center. In our case for domestic violence, it would be our domestic violence center in Orange County, which is Harbor House. But they would reach out seeking information, and they would be the ones to apply for the funding or for the program itself. Now, let's say that the victim is a minor. Their parent or next of kin could apply on their behalf for the compensation assistance. If the survivor is incompetent, same thing. It would be an applicant filing on their behalf. So it would be either their mom, their dad, or whoever their legal guardian was at that time. And then if it was a situation where the victim is deceased, same thing, either a spouse or the next of kin.
Got it. And it sounds like there's many different types of victimizations. What are the victimizations that VSC kind of helps with for victims' compensation?
So we focus on sexual battery, human trafficking, and then any other violent crime, as mentioned, such as armed robbery, home invasions, potential homicide, manslaughter. The only one that we wouldn't assist with for victims comp specifically would be the domestic violence one. And that's just because Orange County does have a certified domestic violence center. So we always encourage the survivor to contact them specifically for the relocation portion. But we can assist with everything else around it.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I know that certain states, the way that their grants come in, they separate for domestic violence and sexual violence. But some states, I think they're kind of together. I don't know if that was the case for New Jersey, Priscilla.
As we were talking about like the differences between Florida and New Jersey. In New Jersey, the application can be completed by anybody that is a victim of any crime. They don't have it separate. I was able to help out victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, victims of robbery, physical or simple assault. So it didn't matter, what type of crime it was. The application covered it all. And, being somebody that was an employee of the hospital, I was able to, help out those victims in that sense. So it wasn't broken up like how it is here in Florida. I found that very interesting.
That is really interesting. And it kind of brings me to my next question as far as like what does and doesn't qualify.
Okay. So this part does get a little tricky. It's kind of the one part that is the hardest for me to speak about. So when talking about eligible victims / applicants, there's a lot of components that go into it. the very basic qualifications for this program is one, that there is proof of a crime. So the Attorney General's office does want to assist the survivor. However, they need to see that a crime did actually occur. With that comes along a police report just to kind of back up that information. Going along with that is cooperation. So the applicant/victim would have to be cooperating with law enforcement. In the case that they don't cooperate with law enforcement or with the state, that could potentially affect the eligibility. They want to see that the applicant is working hand in hand to bring justice. They want to make sure that this perpetrator or abuser does not do this again. So they are looking for the cooperation of the applicant/victim. Something that can potentially cause them to be ineligible, and this is something that has come about more over the last few years, aside from not cooperating, whether or not they have a criminal history, which is kind of unfortunate in certain situations. However, they do look for that the victim was not in custody during the time, that the victim/applicant must have not had any previously adjudicated guilty forcibly felony offenses or not be considered a habitual violent offender. So they do run the background checks on the applicants. And if anything like this comes about on the reports, it can deem them ineligible. Also, submitting an application way past a deadline can potentially affect eligibility.
And what is that deadline?
So for each program, it's very different. For relocation specifically, and I say relocation because that's the one that VSC does the most here. For sexual battery relocation assistance, the applicant/victim has 3 years from the date of the crime. So if a crime occurred 2 days ago, they have 3 years from 2 days ago. If it happened 2 years ago, then they still have that one last year to lingering around to apply for the funds. For domestic violence relocation assistance, they have 30 days from the day that the crime occurred. It's a little bit shorter, and I'm not too sure why. I would love to know that, but it is a little bit shorter than the sexual assault and human trafficking. And for human trafficking specifically, the application and certification documents do have to be submitted by a certified center within either 45 days of the date of the crime occurring or within a time span of the last identifiable threat. So a perfect example is this. I have a client who I worked with where her human trafficking was kind of over the course of 10 to 15 years. However, she just reported it. And because the last identifiable threat was within that 10-year span, give or take, we were still able to assist her in getting her funds. She reported it to law enforcement. There was an entire investigation. So we were able to get her funds, which is awesome. Now, for the other programs such as disability, wage loss, loss of support, funeral expenses, things like that, there is what they call a schedule of benefits. So with compensation for funeral, medical, dental, mental health, or grief counseling, it is 1 year from the day that the crime occurred. If it's disability or wage loss, there is no time bracket because that's something that can be kind of reoccurring and it can just be ongoing. So if a survivor has been out of work for, let's say, 6 to 9 months because of the crime, there's no set deadline as to when they have to apply for it or how long they can receive the funds for. Same thing with the disability and the property loss.
Yeah, this sounds like it can get really complicated. And everyone's needs are different as well. So I'm really glad that there's people like you that exist to help assist with it.
It's so interesting as we were talking about this yesterday in New Jersey, it's a little bit different with the time brackets. So basically you have to, in New Jersey, you have to have reported the crime within 9 months from when it occurred. And then you have up to 5 years to submit an application. It's not as time sensitive as it is here, even regardless of what the service that you're requesting or the assistance that you're requesting of. Once you get that application in, then you go through the process of providing supportive documents and proof, if it's a bill or so forth. But it's very different. I found it very interesting to see how different it was from New Jersey and Florida.
Which is kind of showing how important advocates are in this process, because, especially if the victim, maybe they have experience with victims' compensation in the past, but in a different state. And so they move, and then they unfortunately go through a violent crime as well. Again, they may be, having certain ideas of like, oh, this is the process, but it's completely different state to state. So I love that you're also in on this conversation, Priscilla, because it's just showing, how important advocates are in this process. I also know that there's this concept of like redacted and non-redacted police reports. So what exactly does that mean, and how is that important in this process?
So redacted and non-redacted came into play around June or July of 2019 when Florida passed Marsy's Law. And pretty much all Marsy's Law was this newfound way of saying, we're going to keep everything on a police report redacted, confidential. Most people know it by confidential, especially when a police report includes information regarding a minor. You will notice that on a report, there will be a lot of black blockage on it. That is to protect the identity of that minor. Let's say that a minor is not involved and it's just two adults. If you see anything redacted, it's probably because they're still investigating and it's still an open case at that point. So a lot of the information does have to remain confidential. Now, when it comes to applying for any program under victims' comp, the key thing here is to have proof of that crime. So we need the police report. A lot of times victims struggle with obtaining a non-redacted copy of their police report because either a juvenile is involved or it's still an open case. So what I do is, if for whatever reason the victim cannot obtain that non-redacted copy, I get in contact with PD and request it myself. A lot of times we do get it, and I would say like 9 out of 10 times law enforcement is very compliant with us. They're really open to assisting with it. So they will send it over. In a case that we're not able to obtain it, the Attorney General's office can send over a request directly as well to obtain it. They just need to be able to see the entire narrative of the crime
to prove that it happened in that sense as part of the process. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you saying confidential, because that's a lot easier I'm like, redacted, non-redacted. I get so confused on it. So I appreciate that. I also wanted to know, so we talked a little bit about relocation assistance and also wage loss. What are the other things that victims' compensation can help with?
Absolutely. So a few of the other programs that fall under this large scale umbrella would be disability compensation. So if the victim suffered a permanent injury because of this crime, they can pay out in disability funds. The max payout would be $7,500 that they would pay out. And there is no exact time frame as to how long they have to apply for that. Something else that they can apply for would be property loss, which property loss is a little bit trickier. For this one specifically, the applicant has to be over the age of 60 or deemed a disabled adult. So that one kind of comes a little bit tricky, because we do see crimes where a car was stolen, a home invasion where there was damage to the home, things were stolen. However, if they are not under that bracket of 60 years or older or deemed a disabled adult, they may not qualify for that. Relocation we talked about. And then there are other ones on the application that, for instance, there is an emergency responder's death benefit. So if a law enforcement officer or fire department, anyone suffers a loss in the emergency responder bracket, there is a payout as well to the families of up to $50,000. They do assist with the sexual battery forensic examination, which is the one that we facilitate here. Now, that doesn't go to the victim directly. That would go to the crisis center, but it is to assist the victim as well. We talk about mental health for minors. We talk about grief counseling. They do pay out a certain portion for legal fees. So if there's an attorney regarding the crime that occurred, they can apply for compensation on that as well. I don't have the amount for that one because that's different by each case. No two cases are the same, but they do offer compensation assistance for that as well.
It's a lot. Those are a lot of awesome things, and you can see why it's super important. I was gonna ask this question a little bit later, but we talked a lot about relocation assistance, and for someone who's gone through a sexual assault, and anyone can jump in on this question. why is it important for relocation? What is the what might be a reason why a survivor is looking to relocate? Why is it so important?
So I can give my opinion on it from the office side of it, and then if Priscilla wants to jump in on the field side of it. I think it's very mutual reasoning, a fresh start, safety. Safety is the key thing here. Whether the perpetrator is someone close to them, just a friend, a colleague, or a stranger who may have followed them. The goal is for them to be safe at all times, which is why relocating is so crucial. But then also that fresh start, just to kind of get away from where maybe the crime happened or the environment, the neighborhood. Having to drive by the same neighborhood every day can just be traumatic alone and triggering. If they are living in the same home where the assault happened, that alone can just be a nightmare for them. So just being able to have that fresh start and get away from that and start their healing process is very important, which is why I'm appreciative that this program does exist, because a lot of times, as survivors, as anyone in general, the financial means is really crucial when it comes to relocating. And sometimes that's a missing part.
That is a beautiful answer, Nicole. But definitely, I think that even on the field side of it or clinical side of it, like you said, a lot of it has to do because of safety reasons, wanting to break away with somebody that's in a DV, situation, being able to start fresh is a way to break that cycle, right? To get away from the abuser. Especially if there's children involved, giving an opportunity for the children to have a fresh start, and to allow them to just heal, from the trauma, from the experience. So a lot of times, victims may ask to relocate, or maybe they just can't even go back. Maybe they're not allowed to go back to where they were at. Maybe, they were living with a family that they're the abusing, the abusers, or whatever the crime happened there. They need to move away from that. So there's many reasons why, but I think just to be able to have the opportunity to request assistance for the relocation is it's an amazing thing, because a lot of times, these victims or survivors, they are unaware that they have this opportunity to apply for relocation for this financial assistance. Because, it's a burden just to think about, like, okay, I just went through this traumatic experience. Now I have to think about relocating. I may not have the financial means to even think about the moving costs, deposit for an apartment, maybe a moving truck, or maybe just assistance with the first month's rent, or, whether it's buying, whatever it is that they may need, just to know that they have this option to at least help alleviate a little bit of the cost. So a little bit of a peace of mind. So, it's amazing opportunity that survivors have.
Absolutely. I think it's super vital that survivors know that, like, the resources available to them, on top of them having to just, start their healing journey and process the trauma, this is kind of a peace of mind almost. I also wanted to ask, you mentioned something about like cooperating and not cooperating, and we talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to see if you could go into a little more detail on that, or if you had anything else you wanted to add on that particular topic. I know we talked a little bit about statutes of limitations too. But did you want to speak to exactly like what not cooperating could look like?
Absolutely. So with cooperation, when we apply for this, we tell them, the Attorney General's office is looking for your cooperation. But what does that look like? That can be something as simple as the victim or the victim's family, let's say, being in contact with law enforcement, being in contact with the state attorney's office, staying in the loops with the case that's going on. If the state requires them to come into court for any reason, if the state is asking for statements, witness testimony, anything of that nature, they're just looking that the victim or the victim's family is involved in the case. When the crime initially occurs, that law enforcement comes out to do the investigation and does the initial narrative of the crime. One of the questions that law enforcement does ask every single victim or the family of the victim: do you wish to cooperate? Do you wish to press charges? That is crucial right there, because on the police report, that's going to be typed into the narrative. So if a victim says, yes, I want to cooperate, perfect, we're good to go. We're going to process this. They're going to file it to the state at that point. In the case that a victim or the victim's family says, no, we just want this person out of our lives, take them away, we want nothing to do with this anymore, that can become a little bit tricky, because now the state is going to question, well, why don't you want to cooperate, but you're applying for these funds? What's going on? It's kind of like a misunderstanding between the two. So the upside to that is there is an additional document that can be completed by the applicant or the victim where they can explain as to why they chose not to cooperate at the time, or maybe they changed their mind. Maybe at the time, because of everything that was going on, maybe they weren't sure what cooperation looked like. They just said no. And then maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, they changed their mind. That's okay. They have every right to, especially in a moment of trauma. We're going through a million thoughts. There's a million feelings. You don't know what to do at that moment. And that's okay. So we can also have them complete that additional document explaining exactly what happened and why they didn't want to cooperate and why they're choosing to cooperate now. If they choose not to cooperate and we apply for this program and cooperation has not occurred at all, the Attorney General's office can kick it back and just say, hey, after reviewing everything, we noticed that in the police report, the victim decided not to cooperate. They will also contact the state attorney's office to confirm cooperation. So if the state attorney office also says, no, this person has not been cooperating with us, then that can kick back an application.
That makes a lot of sense. And I do have one question. So for example, if the survivor is looking for victims' compensation, however, we do know that, pressing charges and going through the criminal justice system isn't the journey that everyone wants to go on for their healing process. So is there a way that they can report and not press charges and still get victims' compensation, or will they be required in this context of having to cooperate, that they will have to appear in court and things like that?
Cooperation is always going to be required. I wish it was a little bit easier, honestly, because like you said, going through the system and going through the criminal justice process of a case is never easy, no matter what the circumstances are, but they are always going to look for cooperation. And again, cooperation may not be them having to be in court. It can just be phone calls through the attorney's office. It can just be, hey, I just want to let you know that I relocated, or when's the next court hearing? When is he or she going to be released? Anything as simple as that. It is just so that there is record that that victim or applicant has been in contact with the state attorney's office and knows what's going on.
So basically they haven't ghosted the state
attorney.
Okay.
Exactly.
They're available to answer questions and help the process of law enforcement's, goal, which is to hold criminals accountable for their actions. That makes sense.
Exactly.
Is that the same in New Jersey, Priscilla?
Absolutely. It's definitely the same. They do expect that there be some level of cooperation, with their case. And like Nicole said, communication is super important, so it's part of the process. If they see that you're not cooperating, there's no communication, you're not fulfilling your part as the applicant, they can, close out the application, and then they won't be deemed eligible.
If they were given the resources from victims' compensation, and for whatever reason later on, they may not be able to cooperate for whatever reason, will they ever ask for the money back?
So I've never seen it in a case where the victim has received the funds and then they ask for it back. Now, what I have seen is we've gone through the application process. The victim has been deemed eligible for the funds. And at some point, the victim decided that they didn't want to cooperate anymore. They withheld a check. That I have seen. They have held a check back from being released or sent out to the crisis center because at some point during that time frame, they got notice from the state attorney's office, I should say, that the victim was no longer cooperating, or the victim decided that she or he decided that they didn't want to press charges anymore. So I have seen a check being held back. They're eligible for the funds, but because of that, they're not releasing the funds anymore. But I have not seen it where it's been after. That'd be very interesting.
Well, because I know that this process can be really long. So, yeah.
I've never had that experience either, or have heard of them asking directly to the applicant funds back. Now, in New Jersey, one of the things that I have worked with victims on is applying for to pay for medical bills, right? And so they will ask for medical insurance information. If at the time the person doesn't have medical insurance, right, they want to see that the person is at least applying for charity care. Right. And let's say, for an example, if victims' compensation does pay out to cover any medical bills, and then during that time, the victim does get charity care, they may then petition to charity care to get reimbursement back. Like they'll get them whatever they paid out, they may ask for that back. That I've seen happen. I've had conversations on that. But in terms of, because they're not cooperating and that they were asking the funds back, I've never seen that or heard of that happening.
Okay. Well, that's good news. That's a good thing. So I'm glad to hear about that. Talking about this, there's a lot of information, which is really, really awesome and critical, but it sounds kind of overwhelming. Is this a very overwhelming process for survivors?
It is. It is for different reasons. I say that one with just getting the application done. On our end, getting them scheduled to come and meet with us is not the issue because I'm very flexible, especially when this is time consuming. I always put the survivors first, no matter what. I don't care what's going on my calendar. If this is something crucial, especially if we're getting close to a deadline, I will bring them in almost immediately. The overwhelming part comes in when it comes down to law enforcement, obtaining the supporting documents. With relocation specifically, I think that is the most overwhelming program for survivors to apply for, because with relocation, there's a couple things that go hand in hand with it. So aside from the basis of the law enforcement being involved, obtaining the non-redacted police report, something that they also have to have on hand when we apply for it or are getting ready to submit the application is the new address to where they're relocating to, which is something that just changed recently. They have to know where they're going, and that alone can be very overwhelming. No one knows where they're moving to immediately. A crime just occurred a few days ago. They know they need to get away. They don't know what's going on. They just know that they need help to go. When I talk to the survivor initially and we talk about the program, I let them know before they even come in. This is the application process. This is how we do it. These are the steps that we're going to take. However, in order to fully submit this application, I need the new address. If I submit the application without the new address, there is a possibility that they're going to kick it back. They're going to notify us that the application is incomplete. They'll give us maybe 2 or 3 weeks to submit the new address. And then after that, they can possibly deny it if they don't receive the information, which is something that we don't want to happen, because what happens is if we submit it and the application gets kicked back and denied, that is a one-time chance of the survivor applying for this. And we don't want to jeopardize that. So that alone is very overwhelming for the survivor. Now, I'm very flexible when I'm working with survivors. Ideally, what I like to do is have them come in, look at the application. We can complete the application, and then I give them about a week before submitting it or anything like that. I stay in contact with them, maybe up to 2 weeks as well. Sometimes within the 2 weeks, they can obtain housing and obtain, a document, a lease, whatever the case is, with the new address on it. That's perfectly fine. I can hold an application, especially if we're still far out in timing. Like if the incident just happened, there's no rush immediately to submit the application that very same day. We can wait a week or so, as long as the survivor is comfortable with doing so. If the survivor says, hey, let's just submit it as is, then that's fine too. I can, but I always let them know the possibilities of the Attorney General's office kicking it back. When it comes down to the other programs, such as like the medical reimbursement, the wage loss, the disability, that's a little bit smoother of a process. Now, we are only involved on those programs when it comes to applying for it. After that, it's out of my hands, because what happens is the Attorney General's office will contact the survivor directly at that point, because they're going to obtain more information regarding the circumstances of what happened, what specific injuries they may have occurred. For wage loss specifically, they will contact the victim's employer. There is documents that do have to be signed by the employer as well. So the Attorney General will make direct contact with them at that point. So that process is not so much overwhelming, because when they apply for that, all we have to do is submit the application, the police report, and then whatever corresponding documents the attorney general needs, such as like the wage loss document or invoices for medical bills or funeral expenses. That's a little bit easier of a process. I will say that out of all the programs, the relocation is the most challenging one for survivors to apply for.
I mean, it's hard to relocate in general, let alone like after a trauma. So the fact that they need the address, that's got to be really tough. Did you say that they only have like one chance to apply? Like you send once?
Yes.
Wow.
So that is one of the changes that did occur over the last few years. It used to be 2 years in a lifetime. So if a sexual assault or domestic violence or human trafficking incident happened, let's say at 2 different points in their life, unfortunately, they have 2 chances to apply for this program. They can receive funding twice in a lifetime. It's changed down to now 1 year. I mean, 1 time, my apologies.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Priscilla, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. So I think that, it is definitely an overwhelming process. I think that it all depends case by case, right? Depending on the need, right? What they're applying for and so forth. I know back in New Jersey, when I used to fill out these applications with the victims, I would send them in and they would sign a release of information authorizing me to be a point of contact. So sometimes I would have direct contact with the victim compensation office and I would be like that middle person. So, because a lot of times, these victim survivors, they don't understand the process or they don't know all their rights or they don't know what they're eligible for and so forth. So it was always good to be able to be a part of the process and to kind of guide them. What was overwhelming and frustrating was when they did ask for documents, for the supportive documents, and the victim doesn't have it, can't find it, or doesn't know how to obtain it. That was a challenge to help them, to get it. But we would work with it. I know that the Victim Compensation Office was always very helpful in understanding. I think also looking at the different types of victims that we have when we're working with Spanish-speaking victims. The good thing is that the application was also in Spanish, and they would have they would have bilingual investigators. But it didn't stop there. I mean, we had victims that spoke other languages like Arabic, and then we would have to get the language line involved and so forth. So some of those things, right? That's why I say it's a case by case scenario, because it can be different for each person, what their needs are, what might be some of the boundaries or some of the factors that might make it a little bit more difficult. But the good thing is that, at least us as professionals and as staff, that we are available to them, to kind of help and guide and provide them support and education through the process. Because I think sometimes the overall bigger issue ahead is people are just unaware of what their rights are and unaware of this process and this application. So being able to educate them, I think and just being able to provide that support is very crucial.
Absolutely. And that actually brings me to my other question here, which is, I think that there can be a lot of myths or common misconceptions around this victims compensation program. So what are some of those misconceptions that you kind of want to break down for anyone who's listening who may be wanting to learn more about this?
So that's a tricky one because, again, no 2 scenarios are ever the same. I think I can put it in an example. I had a caller whose car was stolen from her. They found the car. Fine. She got her car back. But then she called because law enforcement told her that someone can help her with compensation because her key fob was damaged. So I had to explain to her, like, that's not what this program is for. Yes, it is a compensation and you were a victim of a car theft, and I am sorry for that. However, this compensation program specifically would have assisted with potential payment of the vehicle or like a reimbursement for the vehicle, depending on how much the car was worth, but not necessarily for the key fob. So I think the misconception is just that it will cover anything and any little thing related to any type of crime. It's more so like the major aspects to it. So a death, funeral, the after trauma, property loss that goes in, hand in hand with it. But it's a tricky one to speak on, I will say. It is available to all survivors, and all victims, yes. But the amounts are different. So also understanding that this is not going to be a forever payout, depending on which program you're applying for. This is just within a certain time span. also understanding that it's not just, hey, you can come and apply for it every single time. This is within a certain time span. We have to get this done. I don't know, I'm trying to think of different scenarios that I can possibly think of. Like I said, no two cases are the same, but just understanding, like, yes, it is a compensation program that is available for you. However, it's not going to fix like a key fob, unfortunately. I wish it would have, because that was, her key fob was damaged because of the crime.
Right.
Nicole, can you verify? Because I know in New Jersey, undocumented people can apply for this. Is that the same here for Florida as well?
Yes, that is the truth. They can. I have had survivors in my previous job who were undocumented, no social security, not born in the US, anything like that. And they were able to receive the compensation as well, because at the end of the day, they were still a victim of a crime that occurred in the state of Florida.
Okay, good. Because it's exactly how it is in New Jersey. And I think that's such a huge misconception that, people that are undocumented feel like, oh, I can't apply because they're going to report me to immigration or to ICE and I'm going to be deported. That's not the case. Just because you're undocumented doesn't mean that you're not eligible. No, you are a victim of a crime that makes you eligible to apply regardless of your immigration status. I know that I have filled out applications on behalf of multiple victims that were undocumented and saw some of those people get denied, unfortunately. However, though, people that did get approved and did get financial compensation, for certain things. Like I remember I had a client that I worked with. He was undocumented. He got injured on his way to work. And from the time that he got injured, it was a physical assault. From when he got injured, even up to when I left the job, that now I'm talking about a couple of months, he wasn't able to work. And he was getting multiple doctor's appointments, physical therapy. He needed transportation because he didn't have a car, he didn't have a driver's license. So we were able to provide him, that assistance, and then, apply through the application for that assistance for like physical therapy, medical benefit need. We had to submit the supporting documents and got reimbursed for it, but he was able to make all his appointments, so, and he was undocumented. He was so afraid of how he was going to do it. But once we educated him, and reassured him, like, it doesn't matter what your immigration status is, you are eligible to apply. And he went ahead and he applied. So then that's a very big misconception that, people that are undocumented can't apply. Not true. They can.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Priscilla, because I always want to reiterate that the services at VSC is the same as well. We don't even ask for insurance. So all of our services are free and confidential for survivors of any kind of trauma, regardless of immigration status. So I always appreciate that you bring that up to the table, because that's super important and very important misconception to break down. Is there any other like misconception as far as like processing length? Is it like quick? Is it a little slow?
I wish it was a lot faster than what it is. I can speak specifically on relocation. I can't speak too much in detail for the other programs because, again, they contact the survivor directly. I lose hands involvement at that point. But for relocation, it is up to 30 days. So from the day that we submit the application directly to the Attorney General's office, it can take from 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Sometimes it goes a little past that, depending on documentation, supporting documents. I'm actually dealing with this right now with a client where they're taking a little bit longer than usual. And it's just because there was some typos in her lease. So her lease was reflecting that she had not relocated. It still showed like an old address. So it's a simple miscommunication. It just needs to get retyped up. But because of that, it's delayed her application an additional 2 weeks. But ideally, they say, hey, it takes up to 30 days. When I process an application, I usually give them about a week and a half before I call them to do a follow-up. Usually still at that week and a half point, the application is still being reviewed. It has not been assigned to an analyst yet. I would say usually by week 2.5 going to 3, it's assigned to an analyst, and now it's being reviewed by the analyst directly. So it is a fairly long process. I always encourage survivors to try to have a backup plan in the case that this doesn't go through. So we explore family support, we explore community resources. I try to get them to get connected with other partners in the community, just in case, we always prepare for the worst no matter what. Hopefully we don't get to the worst, but I always prepare them for it.
Agreed. I think that definitely should have a backup plan, and I definitely can talk on the flip side of it. It can definitely take a while, depending on like whatever they're applying for one, but then the supportive documents. Everything has to be backed up with some type of supportive document, whether if it's a copy of an invoice, a copy of a letter, a copy of work documents, whatever. So it all depends, how quickly can the victim obtain those documents and then submit it, and then the review. Sometimes I submitted an application, and then you're talking about 3-4 months later, we're finally getting a decision, and the person is actually getting their compensation. So it really depends. Or also waited 3 to 4 months to then get that denial. So it really depends on what it is that they're applying for and what is it that they're specifically requesting. One of the things that in New Jersey, what it was good was that on the application in itself would list like all the different benefits that they wanted to apply for. And within that, they were very specific on what was the documentation that was needed. So you were given the heads up. But then what happens is when you submit those documentations, they might call you and say, oh, wait a minute, I think now we need further, proof of this. And now you have to get something else. And then maybe the other document now needs to be notarized or whatever the case may be. So that delays the process. And that is sometimes frustrating and overwhelming, but can also delay the whole process overall. So it all depends. It all depends, but I know that that's what my experience has been in New Jersey. And I can imagine that even though us here at the VSC, we just work with the relocation, but the other flip side of it, the Attorney General's office, right, that they are the state's office. I'm sorry. Is it state attorney?
It's the office of the Attorney General.
You know what I'm trying to say. Basically, I can imagine that it's probably the same process, trying to obtain those documents.
And just to piggyback real quick when it comes to that, one of the crucial things that I see the most is once we've submitted all the documents, let's say that a survivor is applying and they're a little past the deadline, but we still submit explanations, we submit all of the supporting documents. About 2.5 to 3 weeks into submission, we will get a letter stating that they are in need of a letter of immediate need from the state attorney's office. So now that letter is pretty much coming from the state attorney's office, from a victim's advocate or the ASA overseeing the case, pretty much stating that, yes, this victim is still in need of relocation services or any compensation program for that matter. It's just to justify and back up why the survivor is applying for the program past the deadline. So now in that case, I would contact the state attorney's office, let them know what's going on, give them the client's information, and then they will send up that letter directly to the Attorney General's office. So that can also delay the process, because now we need to get in contact with the state attorney's office, and that's not always a 1, 2, 3 phone call, just because they are on cases. Everyone's all over the place, but that alone can delay out an application process.
Absolutely. Again, I think what I'm hearing is that every situation is different, which is why it's so critical that we have advocates such as yourselves helping them through this process, because it can be really overwhelming and it really does depend. I know that as the Certified Rape Crisis Center for Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County, is it for the process of like a sexual battery, for example, they need a victim advocate to sign off on it? Is that it has to be coming from a rape crisis center? Is that correct?
So for the relocation program, yes, it does have to be certified from us, or from any certified center at that matter, only because you're going to be dealing with a check at that point. So if the survivor is eligible for the funds, they are going to send the certified crisis center the funds, and then we disperse it out. So they need to make sure that we are certified to do so. They will never send a check directly to the victim or to the victim's family. It does have to come through us, because they do have to sign off a recoupment form, which is them agreeing that they are picking up their check, that they will be submitting the receipt, which for relocation is a copy of their lease, within a time frame. So they have 45 days to submit that lease from the day that the check was issued. So that recoupment form is me as the advocate confirming that information with them and then them agreeing to those terms.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that the check is actually sent here and then we pay it. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I disperse the checks out to them. And it kind of helps with the flow of things. They get copies of the documents that they're signing. I can kind of witness that they're signing it, because what happens is ultimately, if they don't submit that lease or a notarized letter stating that they have relocated, the Attorney General's office at that point can ask for the funds back. So that's what we don't want. We want to make sure that they are aware of the do's and don'ts of the program, the do's and don'ts of them picking up their check, and we want to make sure that they are aware of the deadlines.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And as we're kind of like getting closer to the end of this conversation, we talked a lot about like what you find important for survivors to know about this program. So if you have any other things that you want to share, because Priscilla, I feel like we've gone over a lot of how it's different in New Jersey, but if you have anything else to add to that, please just anytime jump in. But what are some things that you find important for survivors to know? And then really, how can someone know if this is the right program for them?
So first and foremost, I want everyone to know that there is going to be an advocate to be a voice for them for this program. And that's where my position came in. That's where my position was created for, to be that advocate, to be that voice for the survivor. It's important for them to know that, and again, I can speak for myself right now. I will advocate for them. I will pull tooth and nail to help them get the compensation that they deserve. No dollar amount will ever pay out the trauma that they went through, but it's something. It's something to help them get through what they went through and to start over, like we talked about a little bit earlier. It is important for them to know that they have this available, first of all, to know that this program does exist. A lot of agencies talk about victims comp, but don't know the ins and outs of it. They're just like, hey, there's this program that exists, go apply for it. So it's important for them to know that, yes, this does exist for them. There are some ins and outs to it, but we can take a look at it. We can discuss this. We will figure out which program is most appropriate for you. If any survivor or family wants to know more about the program specifically, or how to apply for it, or which program is best for their situation, I always encourage them, they can contact us directly. They can contact the Attorney General's office directly, which ideally they would be the best person to contact because this is their program. The state attorney is familiar with it. I actually just did a training with Orange County State Attorney regarding this and VOCA specifically. So they too are aware of this program and they know the ins and outs. Like we did in an entire session, just the way we're doing right now, of just what the program is, who qualifies, who doesn't qualify for it. I'm trying to think. Priscilla, help me out here. What else?
You're covering it perfectly. And I think that, what we want people to know is that this, again, is an opportunity, to take some control back and to do something for themselves, right? When we think about, their experience, their trauma, their incident, they lost a lot, and one of it is control and power. And, and being able to say to themselves, well, you know what, I lost this, but I'm going to see if I can get something back. When we talk about, some success stories, like I think about back in New Jersey, I worked with a young lady who was sexually assaulted and she took several days off from work. So I found it very interesting when I moved to Florida that here in Florida, if a victim took days off from work, that it can get covered. They can get a note from us, right? Or something like that it's covered. In New Jersey, it's not like that. If you take time off, you have to take your vacation time, sick time, whatever, right? Or now it's unpaid. So this young lady, she had taken several days after her assault. And so we put in an application for loss of income. And she was so skeptical. She was just like, I don't think I'm going to get anything. Why am I going through this process? And working with her through it all. And then to see several months later, she got that check in the mail, where they had approved it. And she was able to get that money back. For her, that was a win for her. So, I think that this is just an opportunity for people just to kind of take control back and for themselves and to just empower themselves and to get a small win for themselves, out of the things that they lost and to let them know that. And they don't have to do this alone. there's a lot of support. There's a lot of agencies and programs that are willing to help, and we are one of them. And we can definitely educate them and just know if they are unsure, give us a call. And if we don't know the answer, if I don't know the answer, I know I'm going to find out. I'm going to ask Nicole, what is the answer? And then if she don't know, she's going to investigate it, because that's what we do. You know, we are a team here. We are like family, and we're going to look out for each other. And that's the way we operate with our survivors. We're going to look out for them the best that we can.
I love that.
And just to add on to that last part, although Victim Service Center oversees Orange, Osceola, and Seminole County, it's important for victims to know that in the state of Florida, every single crisis center is certified to assist with this program. The DV shelters or DV organizations do the DV portion specifically, but any other crisis center is the same way as us when it comes down to applying for this. So even if they're out of our jurisdiction because of county, it's important for them to know that every single crisis center can help out with this no matter what. And if they go to another state, every state has this program. It's very different. The funds might be different, but every state offers a compensation program for survivors.
I love that. And you know, going off of what both of you are saying, obviously this is really helpful for like monetary and needs that they need for like relocation and things like that. But it sounds like it goes beyond that, where it's kind of bringing back that power and that control, because we know that things like violent crimes is about power and control, right? And so I really appreciate you uplifting that piece to it too. You had a wonderful success story, Priscilla. Did you have any that you also wanted to share? We talked a little bit about them, Nicole, but I wanted to give you some time if you had another success story.
Yeah. So I'm fairly new to the team here at VSC. I've been here almost 5 months now. Actually, today's 4 months officially. Going on 5.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My first client that I worked with here, she was a fairly young teenager, an adult, but she was still a very young teen, trying to figure everything out on her own. It was a sexual assault case. She's working with one of our crisis counselors here. Phenomenal. She's working her case plan. She ran out of the home when everything happened, and she went to go stay with a neighbor. And, you know, the neighbor was very, very helpful, very helpful. She came in, she said, "Hey, I need help with this. You know, what can you do for me? Can you explain this to me?" Of course, we sat down. Both her counselor and I sat together and spoke with her, just because she was so young and she had a grasp on information, but not fully. And it was just, you know, a mix of everything that she was going through, having to take on life by herself now as a young adult, going through the sexual battery. She just emotionally was kind of like all over the place for a little bit. So, you know, I sat with her. We completed the application. She was able to obtain employment within a few weeks, which was amazing as a young girl. She was able to find housing. She ended up moving out of where she was staying. We got her funds, and it was just so insane how her process I've never had such a short process happen, but she met with me. We submitted her application the very same day. We had all of the supporting documents, and we received her funds within 3 weeks. So it was, you know, one of those very rare cases, but I was able to sit back and literally like just say, okay, this is what I want to do. Like, this is what I'm here for. Like, I was able to get her funds just that fast. I know that I can do this for someone else. And again, no two cases are the same ever, but it kind of gives you a little bit of hope as an advocate, and then hope as a survivor, you know, like, hey, we can do this. You know, I'm not by myself, like Priscilla mentioned. Like, you know, she was good. She was on her case plan, and she's still working with us. You know, she's doing her case plan. She's working. She has her own little home now. She's safe. She's away from everyone. She's definitely on that healing path, which is amazing. And through one of our other programs that we have, and maybe we'll get to this at a later time, through VOCA, we were able to assist her with car repairs, because that was another challenge that she had faced. Like, I have a vehicle, but my car has damage to it. And a lot of it came from the crime and the perpetrator damaging her vehicle. So we were able to assist her with that too. So she has a very successful case plan going for her right now. And just to be a part of that just feels amazing.
That's amazing. I love hearing that. And actually, I did want to talk a little bit about that, as far as, you know, you talked about how a survivor can go through an application and maybe it doesn't go as these other success stories have gone, where there's maybe it's denied, or they decide that they don't want to go through the process at all. What are those other options? So you mentioned VOCA. So how else can the VSC help survivors who are looking for assistance?
So VOCA is the Victims of Crime Act, and it's an assistance, a financial assistance. We were rewarded this grant fairly recently, within the last few months. And pretty much it is a financial assistance to cover everything along relocation. So you're talking about storage unit fees, you're talking about moving trucks, moving companies, utility deposits, a one-time car payment insurance too, just to help them navigating for that month of relocation, emergency food or clothing. We're looking at prepaid cell phones. We can help out with transportation, with getting from point A to point B. So that can be like Uber, Lyft service. If they needed to potentially rent a vehicle, we can pay for Greyhounds, plane tickets, anything that supports that relocation. I think there is even like a doorbell security system portion to it. Yeah, it's phenomenal. So kind of going with my success story that I mentioned, we assisted with paying for her car repairs, and all she had to do was come to me, give me an invoice, what the mechanic was going to be charging her. I run it through my team over here. We get the approval for it. And as long as it's within a reasonable price, we're not talking about $20,000 and $30,000, but, within reasonable price, we were able to assist with paying for her repairs and getting her car up and running and on the road so that she can navigate to her job and, to her home safely. VOCA, the things that VOCA covers used to originally be a part of the victim's comp application before they changed it. So it's very interesting. But what was happening was, part of the requirements for victims comp, you have to submit receipts showing that you use the funds for what you said you were going to use them for. They were running into the issue that a lot of survivors weren't submitting receipts. So the grants were being limited because now they're not getting paid out. So they separated the two programs. So now you have victims comp, which assists with relocation, medical reimbursement, wage loss, everything that we discussed at the beginning. Now then you have VOCA, where we facilitate VOCA. There's no application behind it. Law enforcement does not need to be involved, which is phenomenal to a certain extent, because a lot of survivors don't want to get law enforcement involved for many reasons. All we do is have a conversation with them. If they're meeting with our crisis counselors and in conversation, they're like, hey, like I'm moving, but financially I can't pay for a U-Haul. I can't pay for storage. I need a PO box for safety reasons. That's where we come in. We can take care of those payments, and all they have to do is submit a receipt to us directly, and then we can submit it to the Attorney General, and our organization gets reimbursed for it down the line. It's just one of our grant programs. But just knowing that we have these supporting funds along the relocation, it's amazing. Sometimes a survivor has the financial means to pay out to relocate, but doesn't have the additional financial means. Or maybe they just need emergency food or clothing, luggage, because they're going to get on a flight and go back home. Maybe they're originally from another state. We can help with that, and it's so crucial for them to know that this also does exist.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's so nice to know that survivors have different options, and they can be empowered through the help of advocates, of course, to know what those options work best for them and make those decisions. That's incredible. It's so nice to know that while this program is awesome, that, it does have some limits, just like every program. And so it's really nice that the VSC can use VOCA and other resources to help support survivors.
Yeah, I was so excited when we heard about this, because so I transitioned from my last job to this job right in the transition of the victims comp change. So the change happened March 1st. And when I saw the new application, I was like, wait, something's missing on this application. And it was just the additional things that the funds can be used for. So I contact them and I'm like, is this an error? What's going on? And they're like, no, this is what we're doing. Victims comp will be only for relocation, housing only, nothing more. VOCA will be used for everything else, because realistically, if you look at it, we are paying out through the VOCA funds and then we get reimbursed for it. So if they don't submit a receipt to us, that's between them and our organization, rather than it being between the survivor and Tallahassee directly. So it's a little bit less of a stress, We just have to deal with it on our end at that point. But looking at it now, even the expansion of it, the previous application, and I'm probably going to miss a few of them, but we were able to use it for like utilities, moving, U-Haul, first month's, last month's rent, and prepaid cell phone or like Uber services. The entire list that I have for VOCA in front of me is 10 times longer than that. Like you're talking about, we can help them with paying toll passes. So if they have an invoice because they were traveling to another state for relocation, IDs, any pet commitments. So if they have to house their pets in like one of those like doggy hotels or cat hotel thingies, we can help with that as well. We can even build like starter packs. So putting like a starting over bin with linens, pots, pans, anything like that. Like the things that people won't think about that you need part of relocation, we've thought about it. We've put this mass list together. The Attorney General gave us the approval for it and sent it out to the entire state.
That is super incredible. And it sounds like maybe Priscilla, like, was that the case in New Jersey? I know that there weren't segregated programs like they are here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, it's kind of weird because the way the application was, it did cover a lot of the things. The application itself did not just cover relocation, it covered, emergency relocation, care of child or dependents, so like child care facilities, covered like mental health counseling, funeral expenses, attorney fees. That was a big one. Attorney fees, they would cover that as well. There was a lot of things that it would cover. Now, with the program that I worked with specifically, there were funds available to provide assistance, to those clients that maybe, needed something more specific, maybe if it was food, clothing, transportation services, something like that. So we were able out of separate funds, provide that. But in New Jersey, there was a lot that was covered of the application. But I think it's amazing to see what VOCA does cover here in Florida. I know when I first started and Nicole was helping a victim who was on vacation from New Jersey and had to go back, and when they were, dealing with the case, and she needed a plane ticket for her and for her child. And when I heard that VOCA, there was funds through VOCA to send her back and that we were going to help her with that, I was like, wow, that's amazing. I was like, I don't think we were going to be able to do that, in the program that I was at previously, but to know that that's an option available to people here, I thought that was pretty great. So it's nice to see how many options are available to, survivors here and what we can offer. And I'm sure that if we're unable to offer something, even if we were to give some type of resource so that they can navigate, contact, and see, about obtaining services or, looking for something further, we would be able to help with that as well.
That's incredible. And speaking of like those changes that you mentioned, Nicole, to the application for victims' compensation, are there any changes that you wish you could see in this program? It's okay.
I have two main changes that always linger when doing this. The timing of the process. I understand potentially why it takes up to 30 days because it's going through an entire chain of command. However, when a survivor is in a moment of crisis and when they are needing to move fast and act fast, 30 plus days is not realistic for that survivor. Them not knowing what's going to happen, they don't have time to sit and wait 30 plus days for this, or even just 2 or 3 weeks to know if they're eligible. Like, if I could change that, I would do it where, okay, an application is submitted today, let's say fairly early in the day, and maybe within the next 48 to 72 hours, we know eligibility status. I just think that waiting 30 plus days is just not realistic, especially for a survivor who's trying to get somewhere safe, or someone who's been out of work and it's needing wage loss. We have bills to pay. Everyone has family, kids. Every background story is different, but just waiting around is just not realistic. My second thing is the police report and the redacted and the non-redacted. That can be really tricky too. And like I said, they do submit a request for it to the PD station directly, but that process alone is also lengthy. They will request it from us. We'll kind of go tick for tack about it. Like, hey, I did submit this to you. However, they won't release this to me. I can't do anything at that point. now sitting and waiting for the additional request to get sent out to PD. That as well, that extends the application process, and it's all the timing, no matter how you look at it. I wish I can just change the time on it. With the redacted police report, I wish it was one of those situations where we have submitted the police report. You can see the case number, you can contact PD. Hey, can you confirm the following information with this case number? Just that simple. That's not the case, but I wish it was. As a whole, I don't see any other changes. I mean, the amounts did change. That'd probably be something that if the state had the financial means to go back to the larger amounts, that would be phenomenal. I know when I started working with this program, it was originally $1,500 for relocation. And then as of the last year or so, it went down to $1,000, which when people hear that, they're like, what is $1,000 going to do in the state of Florida? And I'm like, I understand 100%, especially here in Central Florida, but it's $1,000. It does help with something. But obviously if I could snap my finger and change that and give them $2,000, I would, or even just the $1,500, realistically, a lot of places now are security deposit, first month's rent, last month's rent, plus a deposit or application fees. So at least from that, you can knock off $1,000 to $1,500 and they don't have to worry about it. With the VOCA side of it, right now, I don't have anything that I would change just because it's been fairly smooth as a whole. We have a lot of flexibility with this program. So right now, everything's in the green with VOCA. But I would change those two things when it comes to victims' comp.
And I would just say that, which we talked a little bit about before, is just making it more aware to people, right? And not just to the survivors, but to other agencies, right? Other professionals. Make them aware that, hey, this program is available. This application is available. Educate them more, because I feel that if different agencies and programs were informed, then they can inform their clients. They can inform victims. I was surprised to see when I was in New Jersey, I had a client that walked into my office and I started talking to him about the application. He's like, I already completed it. I was like, you did? And how did you complete? Like, where did you get this from? He's just like, well, when I was at the police station, he said there was somebody there and they talked about it. They printed out the application and we completed it right there. I almost fell off my chair because I was just like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, because you never hear that. A lot of people just, when you talk about victims' compensation, they're like, what is that? So I think that just making professionals aware, agencies aware that this program is available and out there so that they can offer it to, their clients. I think that's a starting point. I can't stress that enough. And I think that one of the challenges I would like to see just happen a bit more, I guess, and I know it's hard because we know that every case scenario is different. Every situation is different, but sometimes I wish it could just be a little bit more consistent. I think that if one person was given oh, yep, they were approved for this, I wish the next person can also. There might be different barriers or different things that might stop that from happening. But like I was talking to Nicole yesterday, and we were talking about a client that I worked with who was trying to apply for a loss of support. The abuser was the one that was providing the financial income in the household. He was the one that was working. And when he left the house after her incident, she tried to apply for loss of support. He was not listed on any of the utilities at home, was not listed on the lease. She had no access to tax, returns, had nothing. So she could not prove that he lived there with her because they weren't legally married. They were just partners. And it didn't matter. We tried, let her, nope, and she didn't get it. And so that was frustrating, but yet you have other stories where people do get approved. So I know that every case is different. I just wish it would just be more baseline. I think for me, and I think Nicole might feel the same, that anybody that we work with, we want them to all be successful and walk away with what they're asking for, and I know that's a fairy tale in the land far, far away. But, I just wish that, because for that particular person, she was undocumented. She had 3 kids. And because of what happened to her, he left, she was behind on rent, behind on other utilities, was on the risk of becoming homeless. It was so difficult. And victims' compensation would not help her because of that lack of information. So that's frustrating, so yeah, so if we had a magical wand, Nicole, I think that we would probably, fix the situation and everybody would be happy and there would be funds for everybody and everybody would be happy. But unfortunately, that is not the case.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, and I did talk to Priscilla about it yesterday. Again, my background, I come from a DV shelter, and DV is a little bit different when it comes to reload specifically. That scenario has come about a lot where in the police report, it does not say that the two parties resided together or shared a child in common. So the upside to that is if the police report doesn't share that information, the survivor can submit a notarized letter from a family or friend, or even the landlord directly, pretty much just stating that they can testify to the fact that both parties did reside together. So it can be something as simple as, I, Nicole Valentin, can witness that Jane Doe and John Doe resided together at 123 Mary Lane for X amount of time. During the course of this incident, they were residing together at the above address. You sign it, you notarize it. There you go. There's your proof. It is tricky because sometimes homes are not under the names of other parties for whatever reason. It can be being undocumented. It can just be, well, this was my house and the abuser just moved in, or vice versa, and we just never switched anything over. So in the case like that, at least on the DV side, you do have that option to submit that notarized letter as well. As of right now, I have not heard any changes of that. Along the line, if they do change that, then that's a different conversation. But right now, you do have that backup plan, worst case scenario as well, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I think that that's a wonderful place to kind of sign off, kind of talking about how we want to raise more awareness about this program and also the other options for survivors if this program isn't right for them for a variety of different reasons. And just want to give you both claps right now as far as all the amazing work that you do for survivors. I can clearly see, how much passion that you both have. And I know that you do so much. So thank you both so much. And before we sign off, is there anything else that you wanted to kind of add that we may not have covered?
For me specifically, just as a whole, kind of going hand in hand with the awareness, for anyone who's listening to us, for anyone who has found this program online, give us a call. Give us a call, ask 1,000,001 questions, you'll get 1,000,002 answers. I would love to be able to work closely with law enforcement agencies on this because they are front and center when the incident happens. They are the first point of contact for that survivor. So anything that the survivor walks away with that night is going to come from that law enforcement officer. So I would love the opportunity to be able to work with the different agencies. And maybe that's something that we'll put together down the line. But just a training aspect, just understanding what the program is, the ins and outs, because there's a lot of miscommunication behind it. And then by the time they get to us, they're upset because it's like, well, that's not what I was told by this person. That's not what this person told me. So I have to kind of start all the way from A, go all the way through Z. But definitely give us a call, ask questions. Don't ever have any fear to do so. There's no wrong or right question. I will answer anything. And as an advocate, if there's a question that I don't have the answer to, I will take your contact information and I will contact the Attorney General office directly, ask them 1,000,001 questions, and I will give you a call back and give you all of your answers.
Agreed. I definitely want to, I know that, again, I came from New Jersey. I wanted to provide you with a website, www.njvictims.org. That's where you can access the victims' compensation application and all the information for New Jersey. So if anybody that is listening either has family, friends, knows somebody that's from New Jersey, or maybe you had, an incident that happened in New Jersey and you want more information, I would direct you to that website for more information. Do not be afraid to contact us. Nosotros aquí hablamos español y estamos aquí para servirle. Lo podemos ayudar a aplicar para la aplicación de compensación para víctimas. So, si necesitan más información o quieres hablar con alguien en español, por favor de llamarnos. Estamos aquí para ayudarle en cualquier cosa. Just want to let you guys know that it doesn't matter whether if you're bilingual or not, Spanish speaking or another language, we will find a way to communicate with you. So just to let you know that we are here willing and available. I speak Spanish, obviously, Nicole does as well. And we have other staff that speak Spanish as well. So we're here to assist in any way possible.
I love that. Thank you so, so much. And thank you to the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so, so much, Priscilla and Nicole, for joining me today.
Thank you, Emilie, for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks, Emilie.